At New York Presbyterian Hospital, 10 p.m. The emergency lights flashed blue. In the on-call room, Dr. Amelia Vaughn froze for a brief second as the hospital intercom blared urgently. Code blue, pediatric ER, patient female, 8 years old, severe cranial trauma, emergency neurosurgery required, paging Dr. Vaughn. She set down her coffee cup, a faint smear of red ink still on her hand from the half-finished cerebral blood vessel diagram she'd been sketching. Instinct kicked in. Every motion became quick, deliberate. She grabbed her white coat, buttoned the cuffs tightly, and headed toward the operating room, just as she had countless times over the past 10 years as a surgeon. But tonight wasn't like every other night. Just as she neared the operating room, a panicked voice called out from the neonatal intensive care unit, NICU, hoarse and trembling. "Dr. Vaughn, it's Noah. There's bleeding starting in the left lateral ventricle. Grade 3, it could escalate fast." Amelia stopped in her tracks. Her heart skipped a beat. Noah, her son. He had been born at 27 weeks, weighing barely 980 grams, her fragile miracle after 3 miscarriages, each one carving a scar in her that had never quite healed. When Noah let out his strange, mechanical cry through the ventilator 3 weeks ago in the NICU, it was the first time Amelia, someone who had spent a lifetime trusting in scalpels and reason, truly believed she could love someone so deeply it made her tremble. She turned just as a NICU nurse came rushing up to her, breathless, holding out the latest CT scan report. "We found rapidly spreading hemorrhagic spots in the left frontal horn. Without immediate intervention or close monitoring, there's a high risk of respiratory failure or coma, but we can't proceed without authorization from the attending physician, and that person is you." Amelia felt her legs go weak. She hadn't even had time to take the scan report in her hands when a nearby coordinator repeated, voice steady, almost cold. "The 8-year-old needs emergency surgery now. Without you, there's no one qualified to lead tonight's cranial operation. The trauma is causing increased intracranial pressure. If we delay 30 minutes, the girl could end up paralyzed, or she may not make it." The doctor's heart clenched, as if caught in a steel cage. Noah was in critical condition. But another child, one she had never met, was also fighting for life in the ER, and only she could save that child. She had sworn to save lives. She had chosen this path with all the reason and faith she had in medicine. But now, between 2 emergencies, one was her oath. The other, her child. The room spun around her. She closed her eyes, and in her mind echoed the rhythmic hum of the ventilator, the first days of Noah in the incubator, his wrinkled skin, tubes running everywhere, his tiny chest twitching as if learning to breathe for the first time. "I can open the skulls of dozens of children, but I'm helpless before the fragile vessels in my own son's brain." The thought rose from deep within and made her hands tremble ever so slightly. A young colleague rushed over, his voice firm with conviction. "I'll watch over Noah. I'll be right there, but this surgery, only you can do it." Amelia looked at him. His eyes were full of trust, but his nod couldn't replace her son's gaze, because in the worst-case scenario, she feared Noah might never open his eyes to look at her again. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly in both directions. Amelia stood between 2 doors. On one side, the operating room, bathed in cold, sterile light. On the other, the NICU, dim, glowing softly from incubators, where her tiny son was clinging to life. "Do you want to go to the NICU?" the nurse asked gently. Amelia looked up, her lips pressed into a tight line. After a few seconds, she shook her head. "No, I'm going into the OR." The words left her mouth plainly, but inside, they tore through her soul. Just before turning away, she spoke to the NICU nurse. "Record all of Noah's vitals every 5 minutes. If the bleeding worsens, call in Dr. Lin immediately, and tell him, treat Noah as if he were his only child." There are no words strong enough to capture the moment a mother walks away from her critically ill child to save another. But Amelia knew. If she abandoned this surgery, another child might lose their only chance to live, and that child's mother would spend the rest of her life haunted, just as Amelia was already haunted now. She stepped into the operating room. The surgery began at 10:23 p.m. Blood streamed from the left temporal region of the 8-year-old girl, thin, fragile lines like red threads. Amelia gripped the scalpel tightly, every movement precise, deliberate, but her eyes kept darting to the clock. 30 minutes, 1 hour, 2 hours. Amid the tiny vessels, Noah's image kept surfacing in her mind, his skin tinged blue, his breathing labored, his tiny hand limp in the incubator. "How's it going, doctor?" the assistant asked as they completed the hematoma removal. Amelia gave a faint nod, but her throat felt like it was closing, as if, throughout the surgery, she had been forbidden from being a mother. When the final stitch was placed, the clock read 3:41 a.m. She nearly collapsed. "Surgery was successful," the assistant announced. Amelia didn't react. She asked just one thing. "Did the NICU call?" A resident silently handed her the pager. A shaky line of text appeared on the screen. "Noah, condition worsening, light coma. Dr. Lin is with him." Her arms dropped to her sides. For the first time in years of walking the line between life and death, Amelia felt utterly powerless. The on-call room was eerily quiet. No more buzzing machines, no more hurried footsteps, only the sterile glow of neon lights spilling across her blood-stained surgical gown. Amelia sat there, back hunched, hand pressed to her forehead. Her chest felt like it was caving in under an invisible weight. She didn't cry. No one saw the chief of neurosurgery at New York Presbyterian cry. Only one thing gave her away, her lips trembling slightly as she stared at the latest report from the NICU. Noah, heart rate slowing, abnormal EEG patterns, risk of deep coma. In her life, Amelia had saved hundreds of children. She had learned to shut off her emotions each time she stepped into the operating room. But now, all logic betrayed her. She couldn't justify it. She couldn't soothe herself with the word duty. "I save other people's children, but I couldn't save my own." That thought echoed over and over again, like a hollow thud reverberating inside her chest. A soft knock broke the silence. The door opened slightly. Head nurse Diane stepped in quietly, saying nothing. She placed a pale gray envelope on the table. "This came for you, before the surgery. But with everything going on, I didn't dare interrupt. It's from your ex-husband." Amelia stared at the envelope. Her hand hesitated. It had been over 6 months since they signed the divorce papers. She never imagined he still cared. The letter was short. "Amelia, I don't blame you. I understand. We both chose the hardest paths. You, a doctor. Me, a war correspondent. You save lives. I tell the world about pain. But I always knew, among all your dreams, there was one you never let go of. To be a mother. I saw you collapse and cry alone in the bathroom after your second miscarriage. You didn't say a word, but I knew your heart had shattered. And even though we're no longer together, I still pray, not for me to survive the bombs and bullets, but for you to one day see your child grow up healthy and alive. If he opens his eyes, I hope the first thing he sees isn't the cold light of surgery, but your smile, not as a doctor, but as a mother." Amelia pressed the letter to her chest. Her eyes stared blankly at the hospital ceiling, not because of the words, but because of the understanding behind them. Through all the years she appeared strong, maybe he had been the only one who truly saw her weakness. She didn't know how long she had been sitting there in silence when the door opened again. This time, it was a woman with short brown hair, holding something wrapped in a soft cloth. "Dr. Vaughn?" the woman said, voice trembling. I'm Lucy's mother, the 8-year-old from last night. Thank you for saving her." Amelia gave a slight nod, her eyes still distant. Empty. The woman stepped closer and gently placed a beautiful white teddy bear on the table. Her voice caught as she spoke. "I overheard some of the doctors and nurses talking about your son. I used to think doctors were the strongest people in the world. But now I understand, when you're a mother, that's when you're truly invincible." Amelia looked up. For the first time in hours, her eyes welled with red. For the second time that night, someone saw her not as a doctor, but as a mother. She reached out and touched the teddy bear, her fingers trembling slightly, as if brushing against the scars still smoldering deep inside her. Amelia whispered, I don't know how much more loss I can endure, but I won't miss even a single last second." Since that day, Amelia no longer entered the NICU with charts, medical records, or complicated terminology. She came every night, exactly at 8 p.m., when the main shift had changed. No white coat, just a mother, with tired, shadowed eyes from sleepless nights and trembling hands each time they touched the glass of the incubator. She gently brushed the small necklace resting on her chest, the one with Noah engraved on it. Then she sat beside the incubator, watching the tiny figure lying inside, no bigger than her palm, covered in IV lines. But behind those closed lids were still the most beautiful eyes she had ever known. Amelia placed her hand on the glass and whispered, "Hi, Noah. It's Mommy. I'm here again. You don't need to hear the machines. You just need to hear my voice. We're going to fight together." She told stories. She sang lullabies. She placed a small recorder next to the ventilator, so her voice would always be with him, even when she had to go back to work. On the tape, she spoke about the tiniest things, how she learned to breathe deeply when she was afraid, how she once sneaked cookies when she was sad, and how she came to love a little boy who had never opened his eyes. Once, a NICU nurse asked, "Doctor, why don't you try to get some more rest?" Amelia simply shook her head. "Because maybe one night, Noah will wake up, and if that night I'm not here, I'll never forgive myself." On those quiet nights, there was a man who always stood silently in the NICU hallway, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. He never approached Amelia, not until she looked up and gave him a faint smile. It was Dr. Ian Calloway, a neurologist, a longtime colleague who had worked beside Amelia through hundreds of surgeries. Quiet, dedicated, soft-spoken, and he hadn't left the hospital before midnight even once since Noah was born. No one knew, not even Amelia, that he had loved her silently for the past 5 years. Only he noticed. Whenever Amelia tucked her hands into her coat pockets after using her stethoscope, it was to hide her fear. Only he remembered. At last year's Christmas party, while everyone laughed and mingled, she sat alone on the balcony, and in her eyes there were no twinkling lights. Only emptiness. Ian never asked questions, but every night on shift he brought her something small, a portable heater, a thermos, a snack from the cafeteria. She never realized that the last person to leave after every shift was always him. That night, Amelia was so exhausted, she rested her head against the side of the incubator. Ian sat down quietly beside her, saying nothing, just gently pulling her coat up over her shoulders. Amelia spoke hoarsely, her voice barely audible. "Have you ever thought, maybe I don't deserve to be a mother?" Ian remained silent. Then very softly he replied, "No one has to deserve to love their child, Amelia. You just need the courage to stay, even when you don't know how it will end." She turned to him. For the first time, there were no defenses, no mask, just a woman, torn open by hope and fear. "If there's anything I can do," he began, hesitant. "Stay. Don't leave." She cut him off. Ian nodded, and from that night on, he never did. Every evening, he was the one who brought her books, wiped down the incubator glass, replaced the voice recorder's batteries when they ran low. He even studied neonatal respiratory support techniques, though it wasn't his field of expertise. Once, when Amelia was so exhausted she fell asleep beside the incubator, Ian sat silently beside her, watching over Noah in her place. Another night, Noah suddenly experienced an oxygen drop. Alarms blared. Amelia jolted awake, heart pounding, and rushed into the room. Nurses moved quickly. The NICU doctor adjusted the ventilator. Amelia stood frozen, not as a surgeon, but as a mother. She gripped Noah's tiny hand through the incubator wall. "I'm here, baby. Can you hear me? It's Mommy." "Don't go. I haven't finished yesterday's story yet." And then the machine stabilized. His heart rate returned to normal. She didn't scream. She simply collapsed into Ian's arms, the only one who hadn't left the room when the alarms went off. Ian held her close and whispered, "There's no one stronger than a mother surviving the night beside her child." After that night, Amelia placed an extra chair beside the incubator, just for Ian. They didn't speak much, but sometimes presence was enough. And so, night after night, she read. He worked beside her on his laptop. She sighed. He poured her water. She sat in silence. He stayed beside her. No one mentioned tomorrow, but both of them believed in one thing. As long as there was still tonight, there was still hope. 19 days later, at 2:14 a.m., Amelia Vaughn sat motionless beside the incubator, her hand loosely gripping the pendant engraved with Noah, now faded from being clutched too many times. On the table lay an old book, its pages slightly wrinkled, marked by a folded scrap of paper. Tonight, she hadn't continued reading. The story remained unfinished. So did her heart. Noah still hadn't opened his eyes. His condition seemed more stable, but the NICU doctors refused to make promises. The brain still showed signs of mild swelling. His hearing responded faintly, but vision remained a vast, uncertain void. A nurse had once whispered, "Some babies are born never seeing the light, but they still recognize their mother's voice." Amelia had once believed she could wait, but with each passing night, silence felt like a dull blade, cutting slowly into her patience. Ian sat beside her, saying nothing. He understood. For those who had built their lives saving others, doing nothing felt like the heaviest sentence of all. Amelia stood. "I have a craniotomy scheduled tomorrow morning," she said, eyes never leaving Noah. "A seizure case. I need to rest a little earlier tonight. Could you watch Noah for me a bit? I'll be back soon." She walked to the NICU door, then stopped, as if her heart had been pulled backward by something unseen. She turned and looked back at the incubator. Noah still lay perfectly still. The ventilator light blinked steadily. His tiny eyelids remained shut. She took a deep breath. "Just one sign, Noah. One small movement. If you move your lips even once, I'll stay." Nothing. Only the beeping machines, the soft, rhythmic breathing of babies suspended between life and the edge of a miracle. Amelia lowered her head. She turned away, and at that exact moment, a nurse whispered from inside the room, "Wait, doctor, I think he moved." Amelia spun around. Her heart pounded. Her ears rang. She moved so quickly she nearly tripped over the monitor cables. She rushed to the incubator. Noah, the baby no bigger than her palm, was opening his eyes. Not fully. His eyelids, thin as gossamer, trembled, then parted, just slightly, into a slit as thin as a thread. His pupils were blurred, unfocused, but not lost, and that gaze paused on one thing only, her face. Everyone in the room fell silent. The nurse gasped, hand covering her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. And then, "He sees you, doctor. He sees you." 3 simple words, like a melody unlocking the door she had been knocking on for 19 long nights. Amelia collapsed beside the incubator. No longer a doctor. No longer the chief of neurosurgery. No longer the composed, capable woman the world always saw. Just a mother, seeing her child see her for the first time. The tears came freely now, without shame. Not sobs, just heavy drops falling one by one, as if releasing 10 years of longing, 3 miscarriages, 1 premature birth, and countless sleepless nights drowning in fear. "Noah, you see me now," she choked, her voice cracking. "You've heard me. And now you see me." She pressed her palm gently to the glass, right where Noah's tiny head turned ever so slightly toward her. One miniature finger twitched, as if reaching for her. Ian, the one who had witnessed it all, stood still. He didn't step forward. He simply smiled, then quietly backed toward the door, leaving Amelia and her son with their first moment of peace after a storm-filled journey. She stayed by Noah's side through the rest of the night and resumed reading the story she had left unfinished the night before. Her voice was still hoarse, but this time it was no longer speaking into silence. Noah wasn't just listening, he was watching. Not clearly, not sharply, but his eyes followed her every movement, as if trying to memorize the face of the woman who had sat there for 19 nights, telling stories to a child the world thought might never wake. That evening, Amelia wrote in her notebook, the first page of a NICU journal she planned to give Noah when he grew up. "Medicine saves lives, but love saves what's left inside us. You may not remember, but in the thick darkness of your earliest days, you called to me in the most miraculous way, with a single look. My surgical armor shifted, slipped, cracked. As you gradually opened your eyes and looked into mine, as I felt your tiny but firm hand clasp around my finger, you slowly claimed me as your own. I don't know if I saved you, but I know without a doubt you saved me. I'm a doctor. I know the smell of antiseptic and blood, but for the first time in my life, I learned what it means to feel a touch without touching, a hug without arms. Doctors aren't always invincible, but mothers never give up. Thank you for seeing me, Noah. That look, it brought me back to life.